Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's session. I'm thrilled to be here with Lakshman and present on one of the last sessions of the last day. When we were thinking about what topic we should present at the RSS and submitting our ideas, we collaborated and thought about, there is something that we feel that we should all be doing better, especially as we look at roles and specializations, and that really comes down to application security. And depending on your background, you may have a part of this responsibility, whether it's securing the infrastructure, the operations, or participating in the application development side of things. And so we're excited to be here. Lakshman, do you want to give a little background on yourself?
Quick introduction. I am a client partner at ProOrg, and I'm also a CEO of a subsidiary company of ProOrg. It's called InHops, that focuses on testing. It also does security testing. We do a lot of DevSecOps as well. Personally myself, I have been a programmer for 15, 16 years. Maybe past 1-2 years haven't been that much hands-on, so that's my passion. I lived SDLC world a lot for 1.5 to 2 decades. So, yeah, that will be my contribution to this conversation.
And I'm kind of taking up some of the other roles. My background and expertise is around cloud and infrastructure, as well as cybersecurity. Although early on in my career, I did spend a couple years in the application development space, when it was a lot different at that point. There wasn't concepts of agile and so much being approached. It was more of a waterfall. We'd program for 6 months and then release something. So I do have a couple questions since I think it's good to kind of get a depth gauge. How many people are in application development here? Is there any programmers?
Or understand SDLC, software development lifecycle, application lifecycle in general.
All right. How about like IT operations, infrastructure, those types of things? Okay, security? Anyone wear at least 2 of those hats as well? IT operation, okay.
Okay, anyone familiar with terminologies like sprint, agile? Okay, just wanted to get a gauge so I can give an introduction. All right. So we will be talking about application security that goes beyond typical infrastructure network security. So one of the main things that is very much error prone is manual testing. So when you build an application, there are many kinds of manual testings that you do, like RBAC, identity access management. Sometimes, depending on who you're talking to, people even categorize penetration testing as manual testing because there is a lot of manual aspect to it. But fundamentally, it is error prone. So in current world, one of the reasons I asked about agile methodologies, if anyone is familiar, the way things are working is like lean startup preaches, validate first, take it to clients, users as early as possible. Things are much more faster. Personally, what we used to take 2 months in about 10 years back, people are expecting us to do it in 2 weeks. And that is possible these days because nowadays it's about putting things together than building it from the scratch. Because that's how pluggable everything has become, especially architecture. So that opens up a lot more vulnerabilities. So there has to be a balance of little bit of automation along with manual to make sure that we are always shipping the code. Fundamentally, the principle that we are trying to follow here is speed, agility without sacrificing security to the best extent possible.
And when it comes to some other things that we may be more familiar with, like firewalls or vulnerability scanning, we have to shift our mindset a little bit too, because the firewalls are still going to be important in modern architecture. There's still sometimes infrastructure that's put in place. There's still perimeters to secure, but it can't just be the infrastructure side there, right? We're talking about platforms that spread across multiple clouds, microservices, platforms as a services, Kubernetes. There needs to be a breadth of different solutions to kind of approach the security gate there. And then on the vulnerability scanning, well, it's still very important to have that component and being able to find those vulnerabilities, in your application. Traditionally, it's been done post-deployment, right? The vulnerability comes out, you patch it, time to get back to it, and wait for the next vulnerability to come. We want to shift those left, meaning put it earlier on into that development cycle so that it doesn't end up being something that you're fixing after the fact, right? And worrying about, hey, did this already get exploited? Can we detect it and fix it before that even happens? I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. We covered a lot of these concepts in the previous one, but the shared responsibility that we talked about is really important because it can't be just a security gate that you're putting everyone through. And if you think about security, a lot of times we think of it as a perimeter that has to be, so there's a sentry there, and if it doesn't pass, then you got to stop it. But that doesn't marry very well with the two principles that Lakshman was talking about with DevOps, which is speed and agility. So we got to find a way to make these all kind of mesh together and become everyone's responsibility. Because when you have it be everyone's responsibility and everyone's kind of going towards the same outcomes, we can get through a lot of these things a lot quicker.
And how many of you are familiar with shift left concept? Okay, just want to make sure. So yeah, to add to Ben, shift left is very important for early detection, but we should not ignore shift right as well. And we'll talk about what shift right, like how we can do it in the DevSecOps environment.
So we need a purpose of why we're doing this, right? And that's to protect our data and the security around it. And there's more than, I listed out 10 different things that happen with applications and impacts that we've seen in the last couple of years. But some of these that I think are critical to really talk about is the development environment with supply chain attacks like SolarWinds. When that happened, that was compromised because of a development environment initially, right? They gained access, they were able to get access to their code repositories and make the changes. Eventually it gets pushed out to 18,000 companies. Public cloud infrastructure and vulnerabilities. Those are coming even faster too these days. There's been a number of them around, for example, Kubernetes or databases in public clouds that require a development team to make some changes to those. Insider and third-party threats, whether that's code leaks, a miss, someone actually downloading code repositories and taking actions there. Those are things that we've seen companies go through and can be challenging. Along with stolen credentials and code leaks, the stolen credentials side of it, of web applications breaches that were detected by Verizon, they said over 50% of them were initially caused by credential theft, right? Someone gets an initial access point in, they start discovering more vulnerabilities, pivot their way through the environment. So to do cloud native development and leverage all of these things, we need to really create a new service delivery model and shifting away from kind of the siloed approach of application development, doing their work and the data teams doing their work and cloud and infrastructure and security is doing theirs, and move into where it's really the same outcomes that everyone's marching towards. And there's a concept called fusion teams for that. And it doesn't mean that you're reorganizing your entire IT structure or anything like that, but it's really bringing in the stakeholders and working collaboratively in the same outcome that you're working towards. And in this case, right, we're developing a digital product or something along the lines of the application space. So you want to include your business stakeholders, the cloud and security teams, the app dev or data stakeholders that would all be part of those teams, both from an architectural and an operational side. These are some of the common roles that are kind of part of that team. Now, depending on your organizational size and what you can absorb, some of the concepts that we're talking about here can be shifted in scale too, right? You may not have all of these things, and as looking out in the room, many of you raised two hands, right? So security and operations of infrastructure may coincide with the same people. But there's going to be really kind of three main kind of roles here, right? The data app dev, security, and then operations pieces.
Cool, thank you. So this gives an overview. A lot of you might have seen this kind of Infinity framework already. Basically, this encapsulates how we see DevSecOps. So dev is to the left, operations is to the right while things are in the production, and there is a marriage of dev, AppSec team, and operations team that needs to come together to work efficiently and cohesively. So especially in the agile style, things are going to get shipped as frequently as 2 weeks, and that's not uncommon. We have seen days, but majority of the cases, it's every sprint. That is typically 2 weeks. So this framework often is interpreted as only automation framework, but in reality, it is not actually. This is a process and framework both put together. All of them coming together, making sure everyone is working as one team. So this again goes to the underlying concept of speed and agility without compromising on the security.
So with this concept, it's really important to start aligning to the same outcomes, right? We can't all be going in different directions as we have to kind of marry these pieces all together. So when security gets married in with the DevOps side of it, we end up with a new value proposition and what those outcomes are, right? We need to match the security, the compliance, resiliency, and speed. And so that's not necessarily an easy concept either to put those all together. But if everyone is kind of aligned to the same outcomes, right, and then we can actually start all working together and then measuring the success in the same ways.
So now let's talk about on the left as things starts in the application lifecycle, right? Everything starts with an architecture. Bunch of solution architects coming together, working with CISO teams, networking teams, operations team to put together an application. Lot of times it is considered once done and be done kind of effort, but in reality it is not. Currently, as people are using more and more SaaS-based tools and doing a lot of integrations, it is always evolving. So there is a need of re-architecture in the application lifecycle as it is continuing to be in the production. From security perspective, broadly, one has to look at 3 areas: application security, data security, and infrastructure security, which is very well covered in well-architected framework that also covers application and data security, but it's worth calling out application and data security, which is why we did. It holistically looks at well-architected framework, holistically looks at the application and gives a very well-defined framework. Especially if you are in Azure or AWS, we highly recommend that you strictly follow that, even if you are halfway through the development process. When it comes to application, what we recommend is to take the least privilege principle. So just give access to what is required. Follow RBAC very religiously, and even while you are testing, test your APIs as well, not just front end. And everyone needs to be trained to look at all the mechanisms. If you are using OAuth 2.0, OpenID Connect, how well the communication and access tokens are attached to the communication. All of those needs to be tested properly. That's where the secure communication and interoperability comes in. Lot of the times, even if everything is secured, things like SQL injections and crazy things can happen, which is why application itself needs to be tested with input validations as well. When it comes to data security, lately what's happening is it's not just one application that you access from the front end and you get access to the data. So there are APIs, so you get access to data through APIs. And if you are using any big data projects, data analytics, people are moving towards data lakes, canonical schemas, where you create a global schema that a lot of people can access. There are concepts of data mesh, data marts. So you create subsections and open it up. So security cannot just leave, you can't just leave it at front end and middle layer. It has to be enforced strictly where it is sitting. If it is sitting in the storage, it needs to be properly wrapped around identity and access management. If it is in the database, ensure that don't just leave it at the request coming from APIs, but row level, column level security needs to be enforced very strictly. And wherever it is sitting, whether it's in the database or in the data lake make sure everything is encrypted, which is basically 101. I'm sure every one of you know about it already.
Part of the well-architected framework that the cloud providers put out, Amazon has one, so does Microsoft for Azure, is a concept around landing zones. And a landing zone in the cloud is kind of a pre-configured environment that's special built for the types of workloads that would be going into it. That is a really critical piece in this, because what it allows you to do is, once you've identified how you need to set up your security, and I'm going to backtrack myself in just a minute to that. Once you've identified how to do it, you can basically create infrastructure as code that can deploy these environments. And then basically you can have policy as code that measures to make sure that those environments are staying the same. But how do we get to make sure that those landing zones are, have all the security needs, right? In this morning's presentation, right, I don't know if anyone saw the keynote there, but basically the concept was you can't prepare for everything, right? There's going to be things that are outside of our control that we're going to be able to not get to because it's going to be too cost prohibitive, et cetera. But we need to take those business requirements and then marry them into what sort of requirements do we need around the application security. And one of the areas that is oftentimes skipped over is in doing application development, because it's hard, it's not fun to do, and you're not really building a whole lot of things, but it's threat modeling. And threat modeling today is a little bit of a pain. There are some free tools out there that can help you do that. Microsoft has one that can help you kind of go through this process, but understand how the attackers could abuse the app design. So basically fit in the app design and the processes, and how you might be able to fix those vulnerabilities in there. And then you can prioritize your different risks, because ultimately at the end, right, you're going to need to prioritize a risk so you can make your best investment calls on that, right? We can only protect against what we can do. And so that gives you at least a starting point of how you should design your security around your applications. Like I mentioned, it's very painful today. There is a lot of advancements in this space, and there's new vendors coming out. And hopefully within the next 2 to 5 years, we may end up with a lot more automation that can kind of project some of this, especially as we make more advancements with the large language models and the AI side of things. But at the end, right now, it's still a manual process, but it's an important piece that needs to be out there.
Well, once the architecture is done, then comes the plan and build. This is again an iterative process, because in Agile you send code to users in a piecemeal fashion, there's never a big bang release typically in Agile methodologies. So from security perspective, there are few things that we have listed. This is not the exhaustive list of things, but something that are key considerations for you to keep in mind. Right? With, again, the same concept of so many options that you have, and now product building is about putting bunch of things together instead of building everything from scratch. Like when I started my career, we had to write like bubble sorts ourselves, like sorting algorithms. Nowadays, no one does that. That stopped 15 years back, right? So now it has become about just identify the right framework and plug in. If anyone has used NPM, NuGet packages, you would know if you download one package to use within your application, it will also bring in 10 other dependent packages. And you don't know what libraries that you are shipping with your code to production. So SBOM is very important. If you haven't started using it, we highly recommend you use that. And not just use it for the sake of using it, always keep it up to date and bring your CISO team involved. And we'll also talk about other areas where you should bring in AppSec team and operations team as things are progressing. But have it reviewed. When Log4j event happened, a lot of people did not know if their application is safe or not, because even some of the libraries for their own logging, error handling mechanisms, they have used Log4j. So inadvertently, you may have downloaded Log4j into your product. So no one knows. So this could be helpful for you to kind of identify. This, if you are working with vendors, this can also be helpful to ask them to provide this and validate to make sure that your CISO approves it. So not many vendors can provide that, but if they do, they know what they're doing. So use plugins, automation as much as possible. I come from a C# background, so I have used various. One of that includes ReSharper. It does way beyond, goes way beyond security, but it also gives you a lot of recommendations around security, especially as you are developing it. This is like taking it far left as you are coding it. Okay, we talked about least privilege, so I'm not going to repeat that. Just code reviews. Code reviews are going to be very essential to make sure that you are not only following the best practices of industry, but also your own best practices, because every organization, enterprise organizations have their own best practices defined. And it changes, especially as developer turnover comes in, the styling changes, framework, approach, best practices change. So just to keep it consistent, have it together. Show and tells. If you're familiar with sprint ceremonies, that's a ceremony that happens towards the tail end of the sprint, where you present everything that has been built in that sprint. It is very typical to show that to stakeholders, product owners. We recommend that you bring in operations and AppSec team as a passive or sometimes active participant, because they can give you tidbits and alarm you before you start to identify them towards the far right. And lastly, again, use automation. There is this concept of SAST, static application security testing. There are various such concepts. There is DAST, dynamic application security testing, IAST, interactive application security testing, and runtime application security processing as well. All of them comes with different pros and cons. SAST is something that everyone should consider, especially as you are building your artifacts within CI continuous integration itself, because it can scan and give you recommendations right there and then. In general speaking, while you are building and shipping code, from security perspective, there are a couple different approaches. Broadly speaking, there are three: white box testing, black box testing, and gray box. SAST falls within white box testing, which tests inside out. So DAST, dynamic application security testing, is out. Black box testing, it tests outside in. IAST and RASP are gray box testing. You kind of bake them into a product itself as you ship it, so you can monitor in the runtime, but keep in mind, it comes with performance degradation. So don't just use it for all the products, use it where it is necessary. So we will cover all of them in further slides, but just want to mention that.
There's one thing I guess I'll give you a moment to catch your breath there, Lakshman. SCA, the software composition analysis, that piece can also help you with your software bill of materials. I had a customer who came to us for a application pen test, and we looked at some of the core pieces that they're using from an open source perspective, specifically in looking at some libraries there. And one of the things that they didn't spot in there was actually Log4j had been part of that library, and no one had known that, right? And because they weren't doing software composition analysis, they weren't ever able to actually know that until we started doing it for them on that spot.
Cool. I've briefly talked about DAST, IAST as well. So yeah, great addition on the SAC. As you are verifying and preparing and getting ready to take those artifacts to either pre-production or production environments, a couple of other things to ensure. Everything must be signed. Nowadays, if someone started programming recently, by default, things are getting signed and not knowingly. But knowing what is happening behind the scenes when you are building a binary is very helpful in case of something happens. Ensure the code is obfuscated. Obfuscation doesn't really mean that everything is safe, because people can even hack that in. So ensure you hash it so there is no tampering, especially the front-end code like JavaScript, TypeScript, where end user can potentially have access to all of those things. Because all it takes is go to the browser and say, beautify this JavaScript code, and it gives you some structure, and smart people can make sense of even obfuscated code. So they can start to tamper. Penetration testing, we highly recommend continuous penetration testing. We know that it's not going to happen every sprint, but it needs to be a consideration as a part of your version rollout and release management process, which we'll also talk about. Every major release, we encourage you to do some form of penetration testing. So releases, we highly recommend not doing any manual release. We highly recommend restricting all access to the production environment. Only tools should be able to do it. But more importantly, have a very good version roll process. And when you are creating artifacts and shipping code to the production, make sure it passes all your quality gates. Quality gates could mean application quality, code quality, security quality as well. The popular tool that's been used in this case is SonarQube, if you are familiar of it. You can even customize your gates to suit your requirements and how comfortable you are with different kind of metrics within the quality gates. Ensure they pass and don't give any exceptions, please. And as you are rolling the code, no one ever knows what kind of vulnerability shows up when and what could go bad with the product or version that has just been pushed out. So for many clients, version rollback is an afterthought, and it ends up becoming a manual process. Thereby, it opens up a lot of vulnerabilities. So think through the release management process. If you installed a version, you should be able to roll back easily. In many cases, you should be able to roll back at least 90% of it automated fashion and very little manual process. And use infrastructure as code. That goes beyond continuous delivery. It's just deploying the artifacts. Infrastructure as code even ensures that when you are creating an environment, it follows your security posture guidelines. It follows all your best practices within organization and in general industry best practices as well. And from developers' perspective, it is actually very helpful. If you want 2 new environments, you can just click that, get new environments, and kill it. We do that. Sometimes developers do abuse that, but it's okay. It's okay to let them have fun sometimes.
So regarding detection, depending on your application architecture, this area can be pretty complex. And specifically, I bring that up because if you look at how you can kind of weave all these things together, right? We're talking about API gateways, app load balancers, cloud firewalls, identity services, microarchitectures, secret management, Kubernetes, databases, et cetera. Right? That's a lot of things to start detecting on there. Right, and you also have things that are outside your control, third parties that might be on there, APIs, right? Lakshman meant, 2 weeks is oftentimes what we hear from customers to see a preview of something. They want to see what it looks like in that time frame. So you have to sometimes leverage things that accelerate that return on value that they're looking for. So you need to really focus your detection on where you have the most risk. So looking at your remaining items that are on your threat modeling, right? Work with your stakeholders to establish what do you really need visibility into next, right? And some of these you may have better telemetry into than others, but you can work on a process to increase this detection capabilities over time. And there's a lot of new tools coming out, right? The guy this morning mentioned 53, every enterprise has 53 different security tools. Probably if Lakshman and I went through this, right, we'd add 20 new tools to every belt as well. But there's tools that are coming that are going to consolidate these processes together, and they're called cloud native app protection platforms. That's what actually Gartner coins them, but there's a number of them out there, but they weave themselves into the integration process and provide visibility across the various pieces. And also, as we start advancing with new advancements in the AI space, we're going to get different detection capabilities as well in those. Some critical things, though, you definitely need a SIM tool to be able to log and correlate events, alerting notification, right? You got to make sure you alert all of the stakeholders, right? This isn't just something that stays within the security side. This is part of everyone's management at this point. And then another key piece on the detection side is definitely on the web application firewalls. They are still critical today, and there's been an increase in layer 7 denial of service type of attacks. We saw a number of them last week in Israel, where they tried to take down services that were, kind of more critical type of infrastructure. So these workload protections, right, they're going to start giving you that visibility into some of these areas of your microservices and platforms, and give you some ability to see the telemetry and make some determinations of what the threat is. So now we have to respond. And if anyone was in the previous session that was in this room, a lot of it was around orchestration and automation. That's key to the entire life cycle here, is being able to leverage tooling that can make things easier. Because what we're talking about is a lot of stuff that needs to happen in correlation together. So security orchestration is critical for identification of those threats and communication of what actions could be taken, whether that's adjusting something on the WAF firewall or a notification of a vulnerability, and what is type of analysis should someone be able to do on that. We should see some different spaces in here too when it comes to the response side with AI. I've seen some preview capabilities around response type of actions being assistive at this point, right? They're not necessarily going to take a complete action for you, but maybe they're going to suggest the next steps that would be appropriate in this incident. That can help a lot with the different stakeholders that would be part of this team, and being able to understand what is applicable to them, right? Applying the knowledge across different roles. Additionally, when they do get more autonomous and more agent-based, right, there could be potential direct actions that could be done that wouldn't necessarily need an analyst to or a playbook to be defined ahead of time. They can take that response today. A key piece, and this is something that we've seen in, I've personally experienced in many different incident responses, and is preparedness, right? If this is a critical application, treat it just as if you would anything else in the business when it comes to incident response. Be prepared for it, right? What happens when that app becomes, say the worst case scenario, right? Someone gets access to the data, all of the information's leaked. What do you do, right? You got to be able to have those types of responses kind of pre-planned, right? You don't want to be reactive in that situation. And with all the different stakeholders, right, you want a coordinated effort. So tabletop exercises are great to go through on that side. And then, this is a continuous life cycle. So anything that you do in here, right, we've got to be able to modify and adjust, right? So you need to be re-involved. All of the stakeholders that are doing the detect and response need to participate in the architecture planning and building and understand what those changes are so they can be prepared to help manage the detection and response side of the security.
And as you respond, you inevitably will have accumulated some technical debt. You can categorize low, medium, high, but a lot of times what we have seen is it goes unnoticed. Ensure that in your project management tools, whether it's Jira, Azure DevOps, it is logged and it is being tracked. That is why AppSec team and operations team participating in some of the sprint ceremonies, especially like show and tell, is going to be helpful to keep checking on that. Or else it will just go unnoticed, especially if it's a low priority item. So everything needs to be kind of married together.
So with that, we'd like to open it up if there's questions. Happy to answer them. Yes, Jim.
So obviously from the beginning of the conversation, show of hands, there's not a lot of developers in the room, but that doesn't mean that these folks will actually have to own those applications. So if an organization is looking to partner with a company to develop for them, what types of questions should they be asking that organization to ensure that they're following good security principles? And also, what should they be looking for in the proposals when they're reviewing them to ensure that they know that this type of work is being done, this type of process is being followed?
The due diligence piece is good on there. And realistically, some organizations, depending on what you're consuming, right, if it's on the SaaS level, they may not open it up too much to you to be able to share kind of what is behind their development process. But oftentimes what we have found in working with companies that do due diligence on it, right, they will open up kind of what some of their life cycles are, what sort of testing that they're doing on that, how frequent it's happening. They may share that S-bound with you so that you are aware of what's in that. On the customized side, Lakshmi, maybe you have a couple of things that...
Yeah. So first things, see if they have some standards. For example, how well they are maintaining their own house. Like, are they ISO 27001 certified, ISO 9001? It preaches how well you are doing the testing practices and things like that. That's actually, I think, a baseline to start with. And a lot of times, what we have seen is vendors talk about technology and conversations start and stop at technology. Are they talking about process? Are they talking about what after development? Because it's an afterthought for good many technology providers as well, because their job is done. SOW is done, I'm out. So if someone is saying, I'm going to be there to manage, ask them questions. Don't take for it because they want that business to. Why are they doing? How are they doing? Why do you think that they can do it efficiently? And whatever knowledge that you have asked, like S-bomb is a very good question to ask. Even if vendors are not using it, if they know of it, that's actually a check mark, because not many know of that, not many use of that. And DevSecOps, how much of they are doing in automation. Basics nowadays have changed. Everyone was using CI/CD 3-4 years back. Nowadays, IAC has become a norm. Okay, check for those current norms. So that also tells you if they are keeping up with latest practices or not. And for example, if they are using Azure, check if they are using service principals, managed identities properly. That tells how strong they are with security, architecture, things like that. So some of those things are very much relevant to what you are doing, but start with basics, like how well they are doing internally. That's a good place to start, and gradually see, check for the process, framework, and then start to ask them questions on the technology. And it's not at all an uncommon practice to give them a questionnaire. Give them the questionnaire of 30, 40, I'm sure if you Google around, you'll find a bunch of them. We do that, and we are happy to do, because it's actually another reason to have a good conversation to see if it's a good fit or not. And don't be afraid to give them a questionnaire and ask them to fill out, and actually get on a call and ask them to explain all the answers.
Would you recommend an independent review as well, potentially?
That always helps. Yeah, that always helps.
So how small is too small, considering if something needs an application pen test? So I oversee our sysadmins, and I've got a code admin guy who loves to write helps for our help desk and for different IT departments, but we're not publishing them, we're not producing them as part of the job. It's just things that can help. But how do I approach that if I say, maybe we need to take a step back and we need to only rely on vendor support things if it's an in-house solution?
Yeah, there's definitely a push towards that, right? I mean, the low-code, no-code stuff is, for the power users, it's putting power back in their hands to be able to do some, automation at a smaller level, or, as I mentioned, something to help the team. You could include that as part of your pen test, of something that's within scope, and your pen test vendor would likely, just treat that as another thing that they could potentially look at, right? If there's something glaring, they'll probably take advantage of it and maybe pivot through on that side. But I would include it in scope. I mean, when we think about the internal networks on the pen testing side, I don't really think anything's really off limits unless you're talking about something in the operational technology space.
Right. And there has to be judgment that comes in, right? And that needs to marry with some of the processes. And what we do is we create what we call high-level, non-functional technical document. It is not architecture, it is not tech stack, it marries a lot of things. what that gives you is, let's say, if someone wrote some automation in Python, like pure Python, versus someone used a bunch of SaaS tools that are already tested and approved by CISO. So now we are talking about opposite ends of the spectrum. So pure play Python code written by non-developers is much more riskier. You just don't know. I would definitely include them in pen testing. So having those kind of documentation and having a way to validate that, you can have checklists to see this. You can have a score later to identify if that needs any validation, further validation. At the very least, I would have it verified by your CISO.
All right. Well, I wanted to thank you all for attending today.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
your
much.
time. I wish you a good rest of your day.